like to show off my new talit. I got it in Israel. If you know me, I got it during my sabbatical, of course. But if you know me, you know I can't actually visit Israel without coming home with at least 2 talitot and a half a dozen or more kippot. I'm like a talit kippotaholic. I mean, it's, you've seen, I just looked at the confirmation pictures, different one every year. But what I love about this talit is not just the color scheme and the musical notes. There are a couple stories behind it. First of all, the tzitzit have the thread of blue woven in them. The thread of blue talked about in the biblical book of Numbers. And they were tied on by my friend Rebbe Eliezer Cohen underneath the western wall. So the holiest of objects completed in the holiest of places. The other story is what it took to get the talit. So it was made by a talit maker who calls himself the Talisman. And he's got a giant loom in his home studio at a tiny little moshav called Shuva, right on the border of the Gaza Strip. And you know, when you hear in the news about rockets landing, being sent by Hamas into Israel, this is one of the places where they land. So I had to hope that when I ordered it, that 6 weeks later, it would be a quiet time. Now, it turned out it was a quiet time, although in between, it was not at all. But the day came, we went and picked it up, and what turned out to be the most dangerous part of the journey was actually renting a car and trying to get out of the city of Jerusalem. The Jerusalem drivers, like the rest of Jerusalem, are very special. They sit on their horns, I think. They honk and they honk and they honk incessantly, even at red lights when you can't move. Now, I tell you this story because the sermon tonight is going to begin and end with a story about the honking of horns. As most of you know, on Erev Rosh Hashanah, I always introduce the theme that's going to be connecting all my high holiday sermons together. And the theme this year, unsurprisingly perhaps, is Israel. It's not a surprise, given that I spent 4 out of my 5-month sabbatical living in Jerusalem. Although I may not mean Israel quite the way that you think I do, as I'll explain in a moment. But first I want to say thank you. Thank you for the sabbatical. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the cardboard cutout. I want to thank the leadership. I want to thank those who took my place in my absence, who really rose up. I couldn't have done it without you, and it was everything I hoped it would be and more. Now, I've been looking forward to it for a long time, for it certainly seemed like for 22 years nonstop, I've talked and worked. It's been a long time, although I did have one in 2011, to be fair as well. But this is actually my 23rd Rosh Hashanah here at Temple Beth Abraham. I had brown hair when I started. I had a beard so I could look older, which I don't have to do anymore. That is absolutely true. Now, I had thought before I left that I was still an Energizer Bunny kind of rabbi. I'm still running around doing a lot of things. But it turns out that being a solo rabbi for a nearly 500 household congregation, combined with the extra challenge of COVID and all that brought, combined with our fabulous executive director, Raina Arnold's extended health leave, combined with probably 3 of the most tragic funerals I've ever dealt with in the month before I left, I needed it even more than I imagined. So thank you again. Thank you. And what did I do on sabbatical? Right, you probably imagine rabbis on sabbatical, like professors, take on a particular project, maybe some writing, but I was given the very explicit instructions to do whatever I wanted. So, besides eating copious amounts of kosher meat, and walking it off with an average of 21,000 steps per day, which is why, if I still look thin, that is why. But what that meant was what we call Torah Lishma, which means Torah learning for its own sake. And this is how it worked itself out. I spent 2 weeks at a rabbinic program put on by the Shalom Hartman Institute, rabbis from different denominations, and their approach to Torah is academic and it's current events. But then I also spent 2 months at a very traditional Orthodox yeshiva in the old city of Jerusalem called Oraita, where one of the main teachers is Rabbi Judah Dardick, the former rabbi of Beth Jacob, the Orthodox synagogue here in Oakland. And it's a gap year yeshiva, so it's meant for people between high school and college. So my class was me and a bunch of 19-year-olds. I fit right in. Sure. But it was also just fantastic. And in between, I helped take over 40 members and staff members of Temple Beth Abraham on a once-in-a-lifetime trip around Israel. And really, it was just awe-inspiring. So, back to the theme. What you're not going to hear are 4 sermons on the geopolitics of the Middle East. Right? Believe it or not, I don't think that I can actually solve all of Israel's problems from here in North America. Right? That's not what I mean by Israel. And in fact, only one of the sermons will even really be about the land of Israel. And that's going to be about my experiences during the sabbatical, and it's going to be on the night of Yom Kippur, on Kol Nidre. On Yom Kippur morning, I'm going to be talking about ancient Israel and the ceremony described in the Torah of the scapegoat. Tomorrow, it's going to be Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, the people Israel. And tonight, it's about Israel, the word, and Israel, the name, Yisrael, which literally means to struggle or wrestle with God. And it was the name given to Jacob after his wrestling match with this strange, divine-like creature. I'm going to talk about exactly what that was in just a minute and what lessons we can take from it. But as Jews especially, we know what it's like to wrestle with God. Most of the people in this room question everything about God. We live in a world of imperfect faith, and we hope maybe to get there one day. So what I want to do is look very carefully at the wrestling match. What happened? Why does he receive the name? What lessons and inspiration can we draw from it? So first I need to set the scene. It happens in Genesis 32, but what's about to happen is Yaakov, Jacob, is ready for a meeting with his brother Esau. And last time he heard, Esau wanted to kill him. So he doesn't know, as he gets ready for this meeting, whether it's going to be reconciliation or battle. So that's the scene. And then Genesis 32 says the following. And Jacob was left alone. And an ish, the Hebrew word there uses ish, man, wrestled with him all night long until the break of dawn. And when this creature, this ish, this man, saw that he could not prevail against him, he grabbed a hold of his hip socket and he dislocated it. And then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." And Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And he said, "Well, what is your name?" And he replied, "Jacob." "Well, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, Yisrael. For you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." So that's the passage. And the first question, of course, is, what was this thing? Right? The text explicitly says it's a man. But we know that in the Torah, a man isn't necessarily a man. Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher, believes it's really a dream. It's Jacob wrestling with himself, because as evidence of that, the very first line says, Jacob was left alone. So who's he wrestling with if there's nobody there? On the other hand, some of the other famous commentators believe it very much is an angel, and a very specific angel. Rashi, the great French commentator, he says it's not just an angel, it's Esau's guardian angel. And that in order for Yaakov, Jacob, now Israel, to face Esau in real life, he's got to get past the guardian angel. The Spanish commentator Ramban, Nachmanides, different guy than Rambam, Maimonides, he says it's an angel sent by God for the specific purpose of losing. The whole idea is to give Jacob, now Israel, confidence so he can face his brother. And Jacob himself, he seems to think he's wrestling with God, because the end of that passage is he names the place of the wrestling match, and he calls it Peniel, which literally means the face of God. And all this was said to have taken place by the Zohar, the Jewish mystical text, on the night of Yom Kippur, this mystical struggle. Now, our wrestling matches may not be quite so mystical, but as human beings, we know what it's like to struggle. We know what it's like to wrestle. We wrestle with faith, we wrestle with ourselves, we wrestle with confidence, we wrestle with relationships, health, family, addiction, you name it, because we're human. And that is our lot in life. We struggle. So what are the lessons that we can take from this wrestling match? Because much more important than what this creature is or was, is what do we learn from it, of course. So I can think of at least 4 lessons that I'm going to share with you briefly, the first 2 of which come from the great Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of England. Lesson number 1, you're never really prepared. Okay, I know we think we are, but we're not. Jacob makes all kinds of preparations. He sends gifts ahead of time. He lines his people up in a particular order to cause the least amount of damage in case there is battle, and he prays. But what he never imagines is that his biggest challenge isn't going to be his brother. It's going to be some weird mythical creature in the middle of the night. Right? We make all these plans. We stress. We worry about all kinds of things, but it's the things that hit us on an idle Tuesday or Wednesday in the middle of the week that we never see coming that are often our greatest challenge. As the Yiddish expression goes, Menschen Nacht und Guten Lacht, which means humans plan and God just laughs. Lesson number 2, the greatest battles are internal ones. They're within. Sacks clearly agrees with Maimonides. He thinks that Jacob is wrestling with himself. He has to defeat his inner demons before he can face the external enemy who turns out not to be an enemy. Kind of reminds me of the fake Kurt Vonnegut graduation speech. There's a line in there that says, "The race is long, and it is with yourself." A couple more lessons that I want to add on to it. We may be victorious in our battles. We may prevail, as Jacob did, but we don't emerge unscathed. Jacob limps for the rest of his life, even though he's now Israel, because of that hip socket. And we have scars from our battles. They fade, but they don't disappear. And all we can really do is acknowledge them and learn from them. And the 4th and final lesson, at least for the moment, is that when it comes to wrestling matches and struggles, it can be really helpful to have faith that Hashem, that God, is right there with us in the trenches, helping us, suffering with us as we do battle, internally or externally. So those are the 4 lessons, and I believe we should be inspired by them. We should be inspired by Israel, the person, because he has emerged from the struggle, and he has prevailed. And just as we should be inspired by Israel, the person, we should be inspired by Israel, the people, the Jewish people, For 3,000 years or 4,000 years, depending on whether you count from Moses or Abraham, nations have come to destroy us, but we are still here. And we're not just surviving, we're thriving. We're rebuilding. 17 million Jews in the world, I read today. Over 17 million, something like 47% are in the land of Israel, the rest throughout the diaspora. We are thriving. We have emerged from the struggle, and we are prevailing. You should be inspired by the people of Israel. You should be inspired by the person Israel. You should be inspired by the people Israel. And you should be inspired, we should be inspired by the land of Israel, the nation of Israel, the state of Israel. Talk about battle scars. Right from its inception, right? Surrounded on all sides by enemies who wanted nothing more than to wipe them off the map. And yet, Israel, despite all the mishigas, despite increasing enemies internally, meaning disarray, dysfunction, disunity, yes, it seems to be a mess over there. But what our nation has accomplished in 75 years of existence is it's almost unprecedented in human history. And although it seems dark, perhaps at the moment, I promise Israel will emerge from the struggle and ultimately prevail. A couple people might have walked out, a couple people are clapping. You should be inspired by the nation of Israel, though. You should be inspired by the people of Israel. You should be inspired by the person of Israel. And if none of those work for you, you should be inspired by our guests tonight, the members of the First AME Church. As most of you know, their church burnt down on a cold night in February this past year. And while their building may have been destroyed temporarily, their community, their spirit, could never be destroyed. And you, the members of Temple Beth Abraham, were the first. Although actually, it might have been my son Micah whose idea it was. I'm not entirely sure. But you were the first to say, "You're a mile from us. Come worship in our space on Sunday mornings." Of course you did. Of course you did, because you knew it was the right thing to do. And you knew that they would do the same thing for us if the circumstances were reversed. And the gratitude that they showed, the letters, the cards, beautiful cards. And they were, of course, to our membership, to Temple Beth Abraham. But they were also to God, to Hashem. I wish you could have seen their Facebook page on the day it was announced that they'd be praying here, that they had a temporary home, right? There were expressions of thanksgiving to us, but most of them read, "Look at God, hallelujah, praise be God, give God all the blessings. Look at God opening doors for us. Be faithful, have faith, won't he do it? Yes." I'm quoting right from that Facebook page. You should be inspired by the members, by the community of the First AME Church in Oakland. You should be inspired by the state of Israel. You should be inspired by the people of Israel. You should be inspired by the person Israel, because all of them, all of us, are continuing to emerge from our struggles, and we have, and we can, and we will prevail. Two more stories. Really, actually sort of two and a half. So while I was studying at the Old City Yeshiva, Oraita, we were studying a tractate of the Talmud called Makot. Makot means lashes, and it's about punishments, this tractate. It's a brutal tractate, but the closing story is worth everything. In the context of the story is that Jerusalem has been destroyed by the Romans. The Temple Mount lies in ruins, and the people have gone into exile. And four of the most prominent rabbis of the time, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva, they walk by the site of the Temple Mount, and they see a fox trampling on what just a few days before was the Holy of Holies. And they begin to cry. Except for Rabbi Akiva. He seems to be smiling. And so the other rabbis say to him, Akiva, how can you be smiling? Our most important site of worship is being trampled on by wild animals. And Akiva said, yes, but is there not a prophecy in the biblical book of Micah which says that Mount Zion shall be laid waste, Jerusalem reduced to a heap of rubble, and the Temple Mount overcome with wild thickets, which ostensibly would also bring wild animals? But is there not also a prophecy in Zechariah which says that Zion shall be restored in glory, that the temple will be rebuilt, and that the old men and the old women will sit in the broad places of Jerusalem? And if the prophecy of Micah is coming true before our eyes, the prophecy of Zechariah cannot be far behind. Redemption could be right around the corner. And so the addendum to that story is that this past year, on the holiday of Tisha B'Av, the holiday where we commemorate the destruction of both temples, on camera, they captured, in the middle of the night, walking along Robinson's Arch, the egalitarian plaza of the Western Wall, a wild animal. Now, it was probably a jackal, but some say it was a fox. Perhaps the redemption is closer than you think. And one final story. Remember I told you we were going to begin and end with the honking of horns. One day, at the Yoraita Yeshiva, getting ready for my Talmud class on Makot, Rabbi Dardick texts the group. Actually, it's called WhatsApp, is what we use in Israel, but and they say, what's up? Instead of what's that? I don't understand, but that's what it says. So he texted ahead, and he said he was going to be late. Well, we waited, and 2 hours later, he shows up. And he is frantic, and he's a mess, and he's disturbed, and agitated, and perturbed, and I mean, he really can't control himself, and he starts talking a mile a minute about why he was so late. The traffic was just terrible. I mean, there was a jackknife truck along the only route to Jerusalem, and the cars were lined up, and there was no way to get around it. And yet, even though everyone knew there was no way to get around it, the Israeli drivers, they honked and they honked and they honked. They kept honking their horns incessantly, and it was deafening. Then he paused, took a deep breath, and with equal parts sarcasm and profundity, he said, you see, what I love about Israelis is they're eternally optimistic. See, they're not honking their horns just because they're impatient or angry. They're honking their horns because they believe that by them honking their horns, it's going to make a difference. That somehow, right amidst all logic, against all logic, they believe that if they honk their horn loudly enough and long enough, the redemption will come. Or at least the movement of the car. So friends, be eternally optimistic. In 5784, be inspired by the person of Israel. Be inspired by the people of Israel. Be inspired by the land of Israel. Be inspired by the first AME church. And may it be a year, 5784, where all of us continue to emerge from our struggles and indeed prevail. Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom. Members of the first AME choir to inspire us as well. thank you, Josh Bale, for streaming for the First AME Church Choir under the direction of Pastor Justin Williams. Pastor Rodney Smith. And for all of you Temple Bethany fans for allowing us to do something just a little different this year. Not so long, Mr. Todd. May it be a good and sweet New Year.